Hi guys, one of the topics that you'll hear us discuss when we're talking about the term trauma is we talk about the trauma train. And the trauma train is the understanding that we literally, figuratively, physically, metaphorically, we inherit the traumas of our parents, but only always. So what does this mean? Well, a simple way to understand that is we can look at studies and we can show that children of Holocaust survivors are prone to PTSD and anxiety. Now, in that example, it's pretty obvious right off the bat that these children were not in concentration camps. They did not go through the actual same traumas as their parents did. What they did is they were modeled the triggers that came, the unresolved distress that came out of those particular experiences. And in this way, we now know children of Holocaust survivors are prone to PTSD and anxiety. So when we take a look at brain activity in human development, this is kind of an important understanding of how this stuff kind of happens for us. If you look at between the ages of in utero, inside the mother, and 2 years old, a dominant brain activity would be one known as delta. So delta for you and I, number one, during that time period, there's no hippocampal volume. So there's not much visual memory for many people. Any memory that's going to be there is going to be autonomic nervous system, kind of emotional, the body remembers kind of memory, a tactile kind of memory. So this is a time period where it's there, we're kind of behind glass making, billions, trillions of neural connections and learning our environment on a very basic level. Between the ages of 2 and 7, 2 and 8, this is a time period where a dominant brain activity would be known as theta. So theta, for you and I as adults, we could compare this to what's called twilight reverie. That time period between being awake and being asleep, where it's kind of half dream and half real, right? So this is what childhood is like. This is why childhood is such a magical time, where it's, it's Santa Claus and Easter Bunny and fairy tales and imagination, So during this time period, the brain activity of the child is absorbing massive amounts of data. Like, we know that during this time period, that if a child is just exposed to, say, some 4 or 5 different languages being utilized around them, that they'll absorb use of that language in a very, short fashion. Whereas as we move up into other adult brain states, it's not quite as easy for us to absorb language in the same way that it is when we're in theta brainwaves. So one of the things in my practice that has become very, very apparent is that if you examine the ages of 2 to 8, 2 to 10, these time periods, and you learn what was modeled to the child during that time period. If you look at what was modeled or what were the actual traumas, and when I say trauma, again, we're using this word very, very loosely. We're using it to describe moving out of flow into, up into a upregulation or a dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, which generally would mean fight, flight, freeze, disconnection, i.e. disassociation in some way. And so when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about everything from, I didn't get like an emotional, conditioning, though I didn't get what I wanted on my 7-year birthday party, to trauma little t, to trauma big T, and this is a graph here that I'm giving to you. So emotional conditioning, trauma little t, trauma big T, where trauma big T may be, I watched my best friend die, in front of my face, in Afghanistan, So we're talking about fight, flight, freeze, or disconnection. We're just talking about really varying degrees, right? So there's flow, and then there's some aspect of dysregulation. This is what we're talking about as far as utilizing the term trauma, okay? So there's variations of that. So when we move into some dysregulation, trauma, its definition would thereby be anything that hasn't received resolution. So trauma is anything that comes at you so hard, so fast, you haven't processed it yet. What does process mean? It means moved out of dysregulation back down into flow. And that really is truly what our guide is across the board, is for us to know how to have social emotional learning, or have tools that allow us to melt back into our natural state of flow, so that we can experience the world in a place of energy rich, where we don't have energy that's going to defense mechanisms that are trying to keep us safe all the time, especially in abstract reality, because we're advanced human beings. So when we look at the trauma train, you know, if you look at what is modeled or a child is exposed to during this age period of 2 to 7, and then you look at what they struggle with in their life, you will see these amazing correlations. Now, correlation doesn't necessarily infer causation or prove causation, but I can tell you that it tends to be a very, very fruitful area of mindful inquiry whenever we're looking at, you know, maybe identifying touch-tone memories or felt sense aspects of negative cognitions that we've been carrying around for a long time. And so what's our goal? Our goal is to melt that. And so a part of this course is showing you, number one, how all these mechanisms work, how they work in relationship to relationships, how they work in relationship to the type of energy that we bring to almost everything in our lives, how we react to certain things, and how we have parts that are kind of diametrically opposed to each other within ourselves. That we can literally have this part that says I should do this, and this part that says that I should do that. And it's like we've got 14 different rowers, and half of them are, or 3 or 4 of them are rowing in this direction, the rest of them are rowing in this direction, and we never get anywhere. And so this is a part of us wanting to understand how that's created so that we can bring awareness, acknowledgement, and acceptance of this pattern and how it manifests for us, or how it manifested for us specifically, so that we can shift it, we can heal it. We can, you know, we're designed to actually heal, but we've got to bring a flashlight down into the subconscious, into these layers of how these different parts of ourselves created ways that they're trying to protect us that are now blocking the way that we want to expand and grow into life. So, trauma train, it's an important subject because often when we look at the concept of generational trauma, like for example, Holocaust survivors, it's going to continue. That choo-choo is going to keep going until somebody brings awareness, acknowledgement, and acceptance and stands in the middle of the tracks of that trauma train, puts up their hand and says, enough, this stops with me.